The scorching summer sun beat down on Yankee Stadium as James Whitfield, CEO of Whitfield Global Investments, watched from his luxury box. At 45, James had everything money could buy: a Manhattan penthouse, a private jet, a diverse investment portfolio worth billions. Yet something was missing. He sipped his scotch absently as he watched the Yankees battle the Red Sox, his mind drifting to quarterly projections rather than the game before him. "Sir, the Hendersons have arrived," his assistant Megan announced, breaking his reverie. "Show them in," James replied without looking away from the field. Business connections were the only reason he maintained this box anyway. As James stood to greet his guests, his peripheral vision caught something that made his heart stop. On the large jumbotron screen, the camera had panned to show fans in the regular seating area. Among them was a face he hadn't seen in nearly a decade: Caroline, his ex-wife. She was smiling, her arm around a young boy who couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. James froze mid-handshake with Robert Henderson. The boy had James' distinctive cleft chin, the same sharp blue eyes, even the characteristic way his eyebrows arched when he smiled. It was like looking at his own childhood photos. "James, everything all right?" Robert asked, following his gaze to the screen. But the camera had already moved on. James fumbled for his phone, pulling up a photo saved from years ago, his and Caroline's wedding day. He compared his younger face to the mental image of the boy. The resemblance was undeniable. "I apologize, Robert," James said, his voice hollow. "Something urgent has come up. Megan will take excellent care of you for the remainder of the game. I need to—" He didn't finish the sentence, already moving toward the door. "Sir, you have the investor meeting in 2 hours," Megan called after him. "Cancel it," James replied, already dialing his head of security. "Frank, I need you to find someone in the stadium right now." As James navigated through the exclusive hallways of the premium seating area, his mind raced. Caroline had left him 9 years ago, citing his workaholic nature and emotional unavailability. Their divorce had been swift and surprisingly amicable. She had asked for little in the settlement, despite being entitled to much more. At the time, he'd been grateful for her discretion and minimal demands. Now, a cold realization washed over him. She had been 3 months along when she left. She must have been. "My name is Theo Teller, and if this introduction has already piqued your curiosity, leave your like to follow the unfolding of this extraordinary journey. Oh, which city are you watching this from? Let us know in the comments below." Frank met James at the entrance to the general seating area. Section 134, row 23. "They're still there." James loosened his tie, feeling suddenly constricted. "I need to do this alone." As he descended the stairs towards section 134, time seemed to slow. The roar of the crowd faded to a dull hum. 9 years of focused ambition, of building his empire while ignoring the hollow feeling inside. It all seemed pointless now as he approached row 23. And there they were. Caroline, still beautiful, her blonde hair now cut into a stylish bob. And beside her, engrossed in the game, was the boy. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. The way he leaned forward when the batter was up, the slight furrow of concentration. James recognized his own mannerisms in this child he'd never met. Caroline saw him first. Her eyes widened in recognition, then understanding, and finally something like resignation. She gently touched the boy's shoulder. "Ethan," she said, loud enough for James to hear over the crowd. "There's someone I'd like you to meet." The boy, Ethan, turned, and James Whitfield, who controlled markets with single decisions, who had stared down corporate raiders without blinking, felt his legs grow weak. Looking into eyes identical to his own, James understood with perfect clarity that his life was about to change forever. The next few minutes unfolded in a surreal blur. James noticed nothing about his surroundings, not the crack of the bat connecting with a ball, not the thunderous roar of the crowd jumping to their feet, not even the home run that sent the stadium into a frenzy. His universe had contracted to this small bubble containing just the three of them. "Hello, James," Caroline said, her voice steady but unable to completely mask her nervousness. It's been a long time. James struggled to find words, his gaze moving between Caroline and the boy, Ethan, who was studying him with undisguised curiosity. You look like the guy from the business magazine, Ethan said suddenly. Mom has it on the coffee table. A small, involuntary smile tugged at James's lips. That would be me. Yes. Caroline placed a protective hand on Ethan's shoulder. Why don't we talk somewhere quieter? There's a concession area around the corner. As they walked, James felt like he was moving through a dream. Ethan bounded ahead, clearly excited by the interruption to the game's routine, while Caroline walked beside James, maintaining a careful distance. He's mine, isn't he? James finally managed, his voice barely audible over the stadium noise. Caroline nodded once, looking straight ahead. I found out just after I left. I was going to tell you, but then what? James felt a surge of anger cutting through his shock. You decided I didn't deserve to know I had a son? You made it very clear that your business was your only priority, Caroline replied, a hint of her own anger surfacing. And the way things ended between us. James remembered their last argument. He had been preparing for a major acquisition, working 18-hour days for weeks. Caroline had given him an ultimatum, make time for their marriage, or she would leave. He had scoffed at what he saw as emotional blackmail, telling her that millions of dollars were at stake, that she was being selfish and unreasonable. That didn't give you the right to keep this from me, James said, but the anger was already draining from his voice, replaced by a profound sadness for all the years lost. They reached the quieter concession area, where Ethan was already examining the menu options with intense concentration, another trait James recognized from his own childhood. Can I have a hot dog? Ethan asked, looking to his mother for permission. Sure, honey, Caroline smiled, then turned to James. Would you mind getting it for him? I need to use the restroom quickly. James recognized the strategic retreat, giving him a moment alone with Ethan. He nodded and approached the counter with his son. 2 hot dogs, please, James said to the vendor. And he glanced at Ethan. What would you like to drink? Lemonade, Ethan replied, eyes still fixed on James with that same analytical gaze. Are you really a billionaire? James almost choked on his surprise. Yes, I suppose I am. Cool. Ethan shrugged as if this was merely an interesting fact rather than anything to be impressed by. I want to design video games when I grow up. Mom says I'm good at math like you. Each casual revelation hit James like a physical blow. His son was good at math. His son wanted to design video games. His son knew about him, at least peripherally. What else had Caroline told him? How would she explain James's absence from his life? How old are you, Ethan? James asked, already calculating the timing in his head. I'll be 9 next month, Ethan replied, confirming James's suspicion. He had a son who was almost 9 years old, and he'd missed everything. First words, first steps, first day of school. The vendor handed over their food, and James paid, noticing how Ethan methodically arranged his condiments in the same way James always had. Ketchup on one half, mustard on the other, never mixing. Caroline returned, and the 3 of them sat at a small table away from the main flow of foot traffic. James couldn't take his eyes off Ethan, cataloging every similarity, every mannerism. Ethan, Caroline began carefully. Mr. Whitfield is an old friend of mine from before you were born. James felt a sharp pang at the deliberate vagueness of her description. He wanted to correct her, to say, I'm your father, but he restrained himself, sensing the delicacy of the situation. Mom said we were coming to the game because it's a special birthday present, Ethan said, looking between the adults with growing suspicion. Even at his young age, he could clearly sense the tension. Caroline exchanged a look with James, a silent plea in her eyes. Not here, not now, not yet. James understood, but it took all his considerable willpower not to demand answers, to not upend this child's world in the middle of a baseball stadium, but the restraint cost him. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up his own hot dog. My company has a box here, James said, finding his voice. Would you two like to watch the rest of the game from there? It's much more comfortable. The question was directed at Ethan, but his eyes sought Caroline's permission. She hesitated before nodding slightly. As they walked toward the premium seating area, James's mind raced with questions and plans. One thing was abundantly clear: whatever else happened, he would not walk away from his son again, even if the initial separation hadn't been his choice. The empire he had built, the wealth he had accumulated, none of it meant anything compared to this discovery. The luxury box felt different when James returned with Caroline and Ethan in tow. What had once been merely a business tool, a place to entertain clients and close deals, now felt hollow and ostentatious through the eyes of his 9-year-old son. Megan raised an eyebrow as they entered, but ever the professional quickly composed herself. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson left to catch dinner reservations, she informed James. Would your guests like any refreshments? Wow, Ethan exclaimed, pressing his face against the glass that offered a perfect view of the field. You can see everything from up here. Caroline stood awkwardly near the entrance, taking in the opulent surroundings, the premium leather seating, the private bar, the array of screens displaying different camera angles of the game. James recognized the slight tightening around her mouth that had always betrayed her discomfort with excessive displays of wealth. This is amazing, Ethan continued, already making himself comfortable in one of the plush seats. Mom, come look at this view. It's certainly something, Caroline replied, moving to sit beside her son, but maintaining distance from James. James dismissed Megan with a quiet word, requesting privacy and instructing that they not be disturbed. Once she left, he sat down on Ethan's other side, creating a triangle of tension that the boy seemed oblivious to as he reveled in the luxury experience. Do you come to all the games? Ethan asked James, his eyes still fixed on the field where the Yankees were mounting a comeback. Not as many as I'd like, James admitted. I'm usually too busy with work. Mom says it's important to make time for things you enjoy, Ethan said with the simple wisdom of childhood, unaware of how his words pierced James like a dagger. Caroline shot James a look that wasn't quite apologetic. Ethan has a very full schedule. Baseball, chess club, coding camp this summer. James absorbed this information hungrily. You play chess? Ethan nodded enthusiastically. I'm the second best player in my grade. Tyler Matthews is first, but he's been playing since he was 4. I used to play competitively in college, James said, excitement building at this shared interest. I could show you some strategies sometime if you'd like. The words hung in the air, weighted with implication. Caroline's posture stiffened. That sounds cool, Ethan replied, blissfully unaware of the undercurrents swirling around him. An uncomfortable silence descended, broken only by the distant sounds of the game and the announcer's commentary flowing through the box's premium sound system. James found himself at a loss. He, who could command boardrooms and intimidate powerful executives, had no idea how to talk to his own son. Ethan, honey, Caroline finally said, would you mind getting me a soda from the cooler over there? I'm a little thirsty. As soon as Ethan was out of earshot, Caroline turned to James, her voice low and urgent. What exactly are you planning here, James? Planning? James repeated, incredulous. I just discovered I have a son that you kept hidden from me for nearly 9 years. I don't have a plan beyond getting to know him. Getting to know him, Caroline echoed, skepticism evident in her tone. And then what? Weekend visits? Summer vacations? Or are you going to sweep in with your billions and try to take him away from me? The accusation stung, partly because in the darkest corners of his mind, James had already considered using his resources to secure as much time with Ethan as possible. I would never do that, he said, though the slight hesitation betrayed him. Wouldn't you? Caroline challenged. The James I knew would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. That's why I left. That's why I didn't tell you about the pregnancy. You had no right. I had every right to protect my child from becoming another acquisition in your portfolio, Caroline hissed, keeping her voice down as Ethan rummaged through the cooler. You couldn't make time for a wife. How would you have made time for a son? The harsh truth of her words hit James with physical force. He had been absent from their marriage long before Caroline physically left. Always another deal, another expansion, another opportunity that couldn't wait. He had built his empire on the foundation of their broken relationship. "I've changed," James said, though he wasn't entirely sure if that was true. He wanted it to be true. "Have you?" Caroline's gaze was penetrating. "But when was the last time you took a vacation? How many hours did you work last week? Who are your close friends? Not business associates, actual friends." James opened his mouth to respond, but found no ready answers. His life was his work. It always had been. "Here, Mom." Ethan returned with a soda, interrupting their tense exchange. "Thank you, sweetie." Caroline smiled, the transition seamless. James watched their easy interaction with a pang of envy. This was what he had missed. The shorthand communication between parent and child, the casual affection, the shared history. "So, you live in Manhattan?" James asked, directing the question at both of them. "Upper West Side," Caroline replied. "Ethan goes to West Side Preparatory." "That's a good school." James nodded, calculating the tuition in his head and wondering if Caroline had financial struggles she hadn't mentioned. The settlement had been generous, but not unlimited. "Mom teaches English literature there," Ethan said proudly. "She's the best teacher in the whole school." James looked at Caroline with surprise. "You're teaching? I thought you were working on your novel." A faint blush colored Caroline's cheeks. "I finished it, actually. It was published last year under a pen name." Another revelation, another piece of her life, of their son's life, that James had missed entirely. That's wonderful, Caroline. Congratulations." The crowd suddenly erupted in cheers as the Yankees scored again. Ethan jumped up, caught in the excitement of the moment, and both adults were grateful for the interruption of their increasingly complicated conversation. As the cheering subsided, James made a decision. "Ethan," he began carefully, "would you and your mom like to have dinner with me after the game? There's a great restaurant not far from here." Ethan looked to his mother questioningly. Caroline hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I suppose that would be all right." It wasn't much, just a dinner, just a few more hours, but for James, it felt like the beginning of something monumental. He hadn't felt this combination of terror and exhilaration since he made his first million at 25. There were complex conversations ahead, legal considerations to navigate, and years of absence to somehow make up for. But sitting here, watching his son's face light up with each play, James felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. The Italian restaurant James selected was only a short walk from Yankee Stadium, an exclusive establishment with a coveted Michelin star, where he was greeted by name. As they were led to a private dining room at the back, James noticed Caroline's discomfort with the obvious display of privilege and wealth. "We could go somewhere more casual," he offered, noticing Ethan's wide-eyed stare at the ornate decor and formal setting. "This is fine," Caroline replied stiffly, though her body language suggested otherwise. Ethan, meanwhile, seemed torn between intimidation and fascination. "Do famous people eat here?" he whispered to James as they were seated at a table adorned with fine china and crystal glasses. "Sometimes," James smiled, watching his son's face light up at the prospect. The maitre d' handed the menus bound in leather, but James noticed Ethan squinting at the Italian names of dishes. "They make an excellent pizza that's not on the menu," James told him. "It's what I usually order." "Really? Pizza?" Ethan's face brightened. "Mom, can I have pizza?" "Of course," Caroline nodded, some of her tension easing at her son's excitement. After they ordered, a margarita pizza for Ethan, risotto for Caroline, and osso buco for James, an awkward silence descended upon the table. James found himself at a loss, overwhelmed by the questions he wanted to ask, the years he wanted to account for. "So," he began tentatively, "chess club and coding camp. You must be pretty smart." Ethan shrugged with the casual modesty of childhood. "I guess. Math is easy. English is harder." "He's being modest," Caroline interjected with obvious pride. "He's in the advanced program at school. He was reading at a 6th grade level when he was 6. "Mom," Ethan protested, embarrassed by the praise but clearly pleased as well. James drank in these details like a man dying of thirst. "What else do you like to do, Ethan, besides baseball and chess?" As Ethan launched into an enthusiastic description of his latest video game obsession, James listened with rapt attention, cataloging every preference, every opinion, every mannerism. Caroline watched them carefully, her expression a complex mixture of caution and something like regret. When their meals arrived, James noticed how Ethan methodically arranged his napkin and utensils, the same way James always did, a habit his own mother had instilled in him. Nature or nurture? How many of these similarities were genetic, and how many more might have developed if he had been present in his son's life? "Ethan," Caroline said gently after they had eaten, "would you mind if I speak with Mr. Whitfield alone for a few minutes? You can have the waiter bring you dessert at that empty table by the window." Once Ethan was settled with a generous slice of tiramisu and a view of the street, Caroline turned to James, her expression serious. "We need to talk about how to proceed," she said quietly. "He doesn't know about you, James. He thinks his father was a graduate student I dated briefly before you, who moved to Europe before I knew I was pregnant." The fabricated story hit James with unexpected force. Not only had he missed his son's life, but his son didn't even know he existed. "Why would you tell him that?" James demanded, struggling to keep his voice low. "Because it was easier than telling him his father didn't want a family," Caroline replied, her words sharp. "And don't pretend it would have been different if you'd known. You made it abundantly clear that your work came first." "That's not fair," James protested. "You never gave me the chance to choose." "You had already chosen," Caroline said, her voice tinged with old pain. "Every time you missed dinner, every weekend you spent at the office, every vacation you cancelled. Why would a child have changed that pattern?" James wanted to argue, but the evidence of his past behavior was damning. Would he have changed if he'd known about Ethan? He liked to think so, but he couldn't be certain. "What matters now is what's best for Ethan," Caroline continued. "He has a stable life, a routine. He's happy and well-adjusted. I won't let you disrupt that because you've suddenly decided you want to play father." "Play father?" James repeated, stunned. "He's my son, Caroline. I have rights." "Legal rights, perhaps," Caroline acknowledged. "But what about moral rights? Where were you for the midnight feedings, the chicken pox, the nightmares? Where were you when he broke his arm falling off the jungle gym in 1st grade? Or when he was bullied by that 4th grader last year?" Each missed milestone felt like a physical blow. James glanced over at Ethan, who was happily enjoying his dessert, unaware that his entire world was about to change. "I want to be in his life," James said finally. "I'll do whatever it takes. Set the terms, Caroline. Joint custody, visitation, child support, whatever you think is best for him. But I can't just walk away now that I know." Caroline studied him intently, searching for something in his expression. "This isn't one of your business deals, James. You can't just negotiate terms and expect everything to fall into place. Ethan is a person, not an asset." "I know that," James replied, frustration mounting. "Why do you assume the worst of me?" "Because I lived with you for 3 years," Caroline said simply. "I watched you treat people as means to an end, even me, eventually." The truth of her assessment was painful to acknowledge. James had been ruthless in his pursuit of success, often at the expense of personal relationships. But finding out about Ethan had shifted something fundamental within him, or perhaps it had merely exposed a void he'd been aware of, but unwilling to examine. "What if we take it slowly?" James suggested, trying a different approach. "No custody battles, no legal threats, just getting to know each other. Let me spend time with him. Supervised, if you prefer. Let him decide if he wants me in his life." Caroline's expression softened slightly. "And when he asks who you are, what should I tell him then?" "The truth," James said firmly. "That I'm his father. That I didn't know about him until now. and that I want to be part of his life if he'll let me. Stories like this remind us how unexpected revelations can completely change the course of our lives. If you believe in second chances and redemption, consider subscribing to this channel so you don't miss our next emotional journey. Caroline glanced toward Ethan, who was now watching people pass by on the street. He'll have questions, difficult ones. I'll answer them honestly, James promised. Caroline, please. I've missed 8 years already. Don't ask me to miss any more. For a long moment, Caroline was silent, weighing her options, calculating the risks to her son's emotional well-being. Finally, she nodded slowly. We're having a picnic in Central Park on Saturday, she said. You can join us, and we'll tell him together. But James, she added, her eyes intense, if you hurt him, if you make promises you don't keep or disappear when things get challenging, I will make sure you never see him again. Are we clear? Crystal clear, James replied, relief washing over him. It was a small concession, but it was a beginning. 3 days from now, he would officially meet his son, not as a stranger, but as his father. The 3 days before the Central Park picnic were the longest of James Whitfield's life. For perhaps the first time since founding his company, work took a backseat to personal matters. He canceled meetings, delegated decisions, and spent hours researching child development and parenting techniques for 8-year-old boys. His executive team was baffled by his sudden shift in priorities, but James offered no explanations. On Friday afternoon, James found himself doing something entirely unprecedented, shopping for a child. He wandered through FAO Schwarz, feeling completely out of his element among the colorful displays and noisy demonstrations. Can I help you find something, sir? A sales associate asked, noting his obvious discomfort. I'm looking for something for my son, James said, the words feeling strange yet wonderful on his tongue. He's almost 9. He likes chess and baseball and wants to design video games someday. The associate's recommendations resulted in a small mountain of purchases, an advanced chess set with weighted pieces, a baseball signed by the entire Yankees team, acquired with a single phone call to the team owner, a beginner's coding kit, and several other items the associate assured him would delight a boy of Ethan's age and interests. As the store prepared to package and deliver his purchases, James suddenly reconsidered. Wait, he told the manager, please keep these items on hold. I'll let you know when to deliver them. Walking out empty-handed felt right. He needed to earn the right to give gifts to his son, not buy his affection with expensive presents. This realization, that there were aspects of life his wealth couldn't simply purchase, was profoundly unsettling to a man accustomed to unlimited financial power. Saturday morning dawned clear and warm. James dressed casually in jeans and a simple button-down shirt, a deliberate choice to appear approachable rather than intimidating. As his driver approached Central Park, James felt a nervousness he hadn't experienced since his first major business presentation decades earlier. Wait here, he instructed his driver as they reached the East 72nd Street entrance. I'll call when I need you. Caroline had texted specific directions to their picnic spot near the conservatory water, where model boats glided across the small pond. As James approached, he spotted them immediately. Caroline spreading a checkered blanket on the grass, Ethan already running toward the water's edge to watch the boats. You came, Caroline said as he approached, surprise evident in her voice. Did you think I wouldn't? James asked, hurt by her apparent expectation of his failure. Caroline shrugged. Old habits. You used to cancel a lot of our plans. The reminder stung, but James couldn't deny its truth. I'm not that person anymore, he said, though even he recognized the hollowness of this claim after only 3 days of attempted change. We'll see, Caroline replied simply. Ethan, come here, please, she called. As Ethan jogged back to the blanket, James felt his heart pounding. This moment, the revelation that would forever alter his son's understanding of his own identity, felt monumental beyond anything he'd experienced in business. Ethan, remember Mr. Whitfield from the baseball game? Caroline began once the boy was seated cross-legged on the blanket. "The billionaire with the cool box seats," Ethan nodded, looking at James with renewed interest. James smiled nervously, taking a seat on the edge of the blanket. "There's something important your mom and I need to tell you, Ethan." Caroline took a deep breath. "Honey, you know how I've told you that your father was someone I knew before you were born, who moved away to Europe?" Ethan nodded, his expression suddenly serious as he sensed the gravity of the conversation. "That wasn't entirely accurate," Caroline continued carefully. "The truth is more complicated. Mr. Whitfield and I were married a long time ago," she explained, watching her son's face closely. "We divorced before I knew I was going to have you." Ethan's gaze shifted between the two adults, his quick mind clearly processing this new information. "So, you're my dad?" he asked James directly, his voice small but steady. James felt a lump form in his throat. "Yes, Ethan, I am your father. But I didn't know about you until I saw you at the baseball game. Your mother and I had already separated when she found out she was pregnant." Ethan was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he asked, "If you had known about me, would you have stayed?" The question, so direct and penetrating, caught James off guard. He glanced at Caroline, who was watching him intently, clearly wondering the same thing. "I would like to think so," James answered honestly. "But I was very focused on my work back then. That's why your mother and I divorced. I didn't make enough time for our family." "Oh," Ethan said, processing this with a maturity that surprised James. "So you didn't want a kid?" "No, that's not it at all," James rushed to clarify. "I just didn't know about you. If I had—" He trailed off, unwilling to make promises about a past that couldn't be changed. "Your father and I made mistakes," Caroline interjected gently. "But none of those mistakes were your fault, and none of them change how much you are loved." Ethan pulled up a blade of grass, twisting it between his fingers as he thought. "Do I have to call you Dad now?" he asked James. "You can call me whatever makes you comfortable," James replied, though the question pierced him. "James is fine for now. And do I have to go live with you sometimes, like Tommy Richards does with his dad on weekends?" James looked to Caroline, who nodded slightly, encouraging him to answer. "That's something we can figure out together if you want to. There's no rush to change anything in your life, Ethan. But I would like to spend time with you," James added carefully. "Get to know you better. Maybe we could play chess sometime, or I could come to one of your baseball games." Ethan considered this, his young face serious with concentration. "Do you know how to code?" "I'm learning Python at camp." "I studied computer science in college," James replied, grateful for this potential connection. "I'm a bit rusty, but I could probably help with Python." A small smile flickered across Ethan's face. "That would be cool." The conversation shifted to safer topics after that. Ethan's upcoming baseball tournament, his favorite subjects in school, the model boats on the pond. James listened intently, asking questions and storing away every detail of his son's life, like precious data. As Ethan grew more comfortable, he became more animated, showing James his baseball mitt, explaining the complex rules of a game he'd invented, and demonstrating his pitching form. Caroline watched them interact with a mixture of caution and what James hoped might be the beginnings of trust. When Ethan asked to go see the boats up close again, Caroline let him run ahead while she and James remained on the blanket. "He's taking it better than I expected," she admitted. "He's remarkable," James said, watching his son. "You've done an amazing job with him, Caroline." She accepted the compliment with a small nod. "It hasn't always been easy. I want to help," James said seriously. "Financially, of course, but also with the parenting. I want to be present for him." "And what happens when the next big deal comes along?" Caroline challenged. "When you're faced with a choice between a school play and a board meeting?" It was a fair question, one James had been asking himself for 3 days. I don't have a perfect answer for you. I can't promise I'll never make mistakes again, but I can promise that I'll try to be better than I was. Ethan deserves that. Caroline studied him for a long moment. He has a baseball game next Wednesday afternoon at 4. If you can make it, maybe you could take him for ice cream after, with me present, she added quickly. It wasn't much, just a game and ice cream, but to James, it felt like the first real step toward knowing his son. I'll be there, I promise. Dee, as they watched Ethan leaning over the edge of the pond, pointing excitedly at a particularly elaborate model sailboat, James felt a strange new emotion building in his chest. For a man who had spent his adult life pursuing more money, more power, more success, the sudden, overwhelming desire to simply be worthy of his son's respect was unfamiliar and humbling. "What are you thinking?" Caroline asked, noticing his expression. James smiled ruefully. "That I've been chasing the wrong things for a very long time." In the weeks following their Central Park meeting, James found himself navigating entirely unfamiliar territory. The man who had built a global financial empire was suddenly struggling with something far more challenging, building a relationship with his 8-year-old son. True to his word, James attended Ethan's baseball game that Wednesday. He arrived early, choosing a seat in the middle of the bleachers rather than asserting any special privilege. When Ethan spotted him from the field, the boy gave a small, hesitant wave that filled James with disproportionate joy. The game itself was unremarkable, a typical Little League affair with its share of strikeouts, errors, and occasional moments of surprising skill. But for James, every time Ethan stepped up to bat or fielded a ball was a revelation. His son played with focused determination, his face scrunched in concentration, just as James's did when facing a complex financial problem. "He's batting .325 this season," Caroline informed him as they watched Ethan take his stance at the plate. "The coach says he has natural talent." After the game, which Ethan's team won narrowly, the three of them went for ice cream as planned. The conversation was stilted at first, with Ethan clearly uncertain how to act around this new father figure, but gradually eased as James asked about the game and listened attentively to Ethan's detailed analysis of his performance. That outing became the first of many carefully orchestrated meetings: a trip to the Natural History Museum, an afternoon at the chess club in Washington Square Park, a Saturday morning coding session where Ethan demonstrated his Python skills with obvious pride. Through it all, Caroline remained present, a watchful guardian, ensuring that James didn't overstep or disappoint. He understood her caution, even as it chafed against his growing desire for a more significant role in his son's life. By the 4th week, James had adjusted his entire work schedule around Ethan's activities. His executive team was bewildered by his new boundaries. No meetings after 3 p.m. on Wednesdays or before 10 a.m. on Saturdays, an unprecedented insistence on being unreachable during certain hours. "Is everything all right, sir?" his CFO asked after James declined yet another critical evening conference call. "Everything is fine, Robert," James replied. "Better than fine, actually. I'm just reprioritizing some aspects of my life." On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, James was surprised to receive a call from Caroline. "Ethan's school is closing early because of a power outage," she explained, sounding harried. "I'm in the middle of giving a test to my senior literature class that I can't leave. Is there any chance I can pick him up?" James offered immediately, already signaling his assistant to clear his schedule. "Really?" The surprise in Caroline's voice was almost insulting. "Of course," James replied firmly. "Text me the details. I'll head there now." 30 minutes later, James was standing in the administrative office of Westside Preparatory, feeling oddly out of place despite his impeccable suit and the deference shown by the staff, who clearly recognized him. "Mr. Whitfield," the secretary said, "we'll need to add you to Ethan's approved pickup list. Ms. Matthews mentioned you're Ethan's father." The simple question caught James off guard. He was Ethan's father biologically, yes, but what had he done to earn that title in any meaningful sense? Still, he nodded. Yes, I am. When Ethan emerged from his classroom, his surprise at seeing James waiting instead of his mother was evident. Where's Mom? He asked, clutching his backpack. She had to give a test and couldn't leave, James explained. She asked if I could pick you up instead. Is that okay? Ethan considered this for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, that's cool. A day. As they walked toward James's waiting car, a new awkwardness descended. This was their first time alone together without Caroline's mediating presence. So, James said as they settled into the back seat, what would you normally do after school? Ethan shrugged. Homework. Sometimes I play video games if I finish early. Any homework today? Just math, Ethan replied. It's easy. Fractions. James nodded, uncertain how to proceed. Should I take you straight home? Ethan looked out the window at the rain streaming down. I guess, unless... He hesitated. Unless what? James prompted. Unless we could go to your office, Ethan asked, a hint of excitement breaking through his usual reserve. Mom says you have a big building in Manhattan. Is that true? James felt a surge of pleasure at his son's interest. It is true. Would you like to see it? Ethan nodded enthusiastically. Howard, James addressed his driver, we're going to headquarters. The Whitfield Global Investments building dominated its corner of the financial district. 58 stories of glass and steel crowned with the distinctive WGI logo. As they pulled into the private underground garage, James found himself seeing the building through fresh eyes, wondering if it would impress his son or merely reinforce the distance between their worlds. In the private elevator that whisked them directly to the executive floor, Ethan was uncharacteristically quiet, his eyes wide as he took in the rapidly changing floor numbers. This elevator is really fast, he finally commented. It's one of the fastest in New York, James confirmed. 0 to 58 floors in under 30 seconds. The executive floor was a hive of activity that immediately paused as James stepped out with Ethan. The sight of their CEO accompanied by a child created a ripple of poorly concealed curiosity among the staffs. Mr. Whitfield, Megan approached immediately, her professional composure slipping only slightly as she acknowledged Ethan with a questioning glance. Megan, this is my son Ethan, James said, the declaration sending a fresh wave of whispers through the office. Ethan, this is Megan, my executive assistant. Nice to meet you, Ethan said politely, seeming to shrink slightly under the sudden attention from the surrounding adults. Sensing his discomfort, James placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Let's go to my office. It has a good view of the harbor. James's corner office was larger than many apartments, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of lower Manhattan and the harbor beyond. Ethan went straight to the windows, pressing his hands against the glass as he looked out at the tiny boats navigating the water far below. You can see forever from up here, he breathed. James smiled, pleased by his son's reaction. It is quite a view. Would be while Ethan explored the office, examining the awards on the walls, the complex financial models displayed on multiple monitors, the collection of rare first-edition investment books. James sent a quick text to Caroline, informing her of their location and asking how long he could keep Ethan. Her reply came quickly. He needs dinner by 6:30. Have him home by 7:30 for bedtime routine. Thank you for helping. The simple expression of gratitude warmed James unexpectedly. 4 weeks ago, Caroline would never have trusted him with their son's care, even in an emergency. So, this is where you work every day? Ethan asked, settling into James's executive chair and giving it an experimental spin. Most days, James confirmed, leaning against his desk, though I've been working from home more recently. Because of me? Ethan asked perceptively. James nodded. I want to have time for you. Ethan considered this, spinning the chair slowly. Mom said you used to work all the time. That's why you guys got divorced. The direct statement, delivered with a child's blunt honesty, caught James off guard. That's part of it, yes. I made mistakes, Ethan. I thought work was the most important thing. And now I know better, James said simply. Ethan nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. Can I see what you do? Mom says you invest money, but I don't really understand what that means. For the next hour, James did his best to explain his work in terms an 8-year-old could grasp. How investments helped businesses grow, how markets responded to world events, how mathematical models could predict financial trends. To his surprise, Ethan followed along with keen interest, asking surprisingly insightful questions. So you're like a farmer, Ethan concluded after James explained the concept of venture capital, but instead of growing corn, you grow money. James laughed. That's actually quite an apt analogy. As the afternoon wore on, several of James's executives found excuses to stop by his office, their curiosity about this unknown son obviously overwhelming their usual discretion. James introduced each of them to Ethan, noting with amusement how his normally intimidating leadership team softened their approach for his son's benefit. Your dad is a very important man, his CFO told Ethan conspiratorially. Sometimes we have trouble getting on his calendar. You must be pretty special. I'm just his kid, Ethan shrugged, but James noticed the way he straightened slightly with pride. By 6 o'clock, Ethan had completed his math homework with minimal assistance from James, who was impressed by his son's facility with fractions, taken a tour of the building's advanced security systems, courtesy of the head of security, who seemed delighted by Ethan's questions, and helped James evaluate a simplistic version of a new investment opportunity, offering surprisingly sound reasoning for rejecting it. We should get you home for dinner, James said reluctantly, checking his watch. Ethan nodded, gathering his backpack. This was cool. Maybe I could come back sometime? Any time you want, James promised, a sudden lump forming in his throat. My office is always open to you. As they rode the elevator down, Ethan looked up at James with an expression of tentative trust that felt like the most significant achievement of James's life. I told my friend Andy that my dad is a billionaire, Ethan said. He didn't believe me. What did you tell him? James asked carefully. Ethan shrugged. I said I didn't care if he believed me or not, it's true. The simple statement, the first time Ethan had referred to him as my dad, rather than James when speaking to others, filled James with an emotion he couldn't fully identify. Pride, certainly, but also a deep sense of responsibility that felt heavier and more meaningful than any business obligation he'd ever shouldered. When they arrived at Caroline's apartment building, she was waiting in the lobby. Her expression as she saw them together, Ethan animatedly recounting his adventure at the office, James listening with obvious adoration, contained a complex mixture of emotions James couldn't fully decipher. It sounds like you had quite an afternoon, she said, as Ethan paused for breath. Mom, James has a computer that can predict when stocks will go up and down, and his building has secret scanners that check everyone who comes in, and his chair spins around really fast. Caroline smiled at her son's enthusiasm. Well, it's time for dinner now. Go on up and wash your hands. I'll be right there. As Ethan raced toward the elevator, Caroline turned to James. Thank you for picking him up. I hope he wasn't too much trouble. He was amazing, James replied honestly. Caroline, he's brilliant. The way he understood complex financial concepts. He gets that from you, she acknowledged with a small smile. The math ability, the analytical thinking. The compliment, unexpected and genuine, caught James by surprise. He gets his emotional intelligence from you, he countered. His empathy, his social awareness, those aren't things I could have taught him. A moment of understanding passed between them, perhaps the first truly amicable exchange since their divorce 9 years earlier. "Would you—" Caroline hesitated. "Would you like to join us for dinner? Nothing fancy, just pasta, but—" "I'd love to," James interrupted, trying not to appear too eager at this unexpected invitation into their home life. As they rode the elevator up to the apartment, James reflected on the strange journey of the past month, from a chance sighting at a baseball game to being invited to dinner. Small steps, perhaps, but each one bringing him closer to the family he never knew he wanted, until it was almost too late. That dinner at Caroline's apartment marked a subtle but significant shift in their fragile three-way relationship. For the first time since discovering Ethan's existence, James felt not like an intruder, but like someone who belonged, if only peripherally, in their lives. The apartment itself revealed much about Caroline's priorities and values. Located in a pre-war building on the Upper West Side, it was modest by Manhattan standards, but thoughtfully arranged. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with literature classics that reflected Caroline's academic background. Ethan's academic achievements and baseball trophies were displayed prominently in the living room. There were no ostentatious luxuries, but everything was of good quality, evidence of Caroline's careful stewardship of the divorce settlement. As the weeks turned to months, these family dinners became more frequent. What began as an occasional Thursday evening ritual gradually expanded to include weekend brunches and the odd Monday night when Caroline had late faculty meetings. Each time, James observed the easy routines between mother and son, the inside jokes, the wordless communication, the established patterns that spoke of years of shared life. Sometimes, watching them together, James felt an acute ache for all he had missed. Other times, he simply felt grateful to be included now, however belatedly. 3 months after that first dinner, James arrived at the apartment to find Ethan in a state of obvious distress, his eyes red-rimmed and his normally animated demeanor subdued. "What's wrong?" James asked Caroline quietly as Ethan retreated to his room. "His baseball coach cut him from the starting lineup," Caroline explained. "Apparently he's been struggling with his batting average lately. He's taking it pretty hard." James nodded, understanding immediately. "May I talk to him?" Caroline hesitated only briefly before nodding. "His room is the second door on the left. Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. James knocked gently on Ethan's door. "Can I come in?" A muffled, "I guess," was the only response. Ethan's room reflected his developing personality. Chess trophies alongside baseball memorabilia, bookshelves containing equal parts adventure novels and coding manuals, walls decorated with posters of both sports heroes and famous scientists. He was sitting cross-legged on his bed, half-heartedly flipping through a baseball card collection. "Your mom told me about the lineup change," James said, taking a seat in the desk chair. "That's tough." Ethan shrugged, not looking up. "Coach says I'm not hitting well enough." "What do you think the problem is?" James asked, deliberately keeping his tone conversational rather than condescending. "I don't know," Ethan mumbled. "I just keep missing." James nodded thoughtfully. "You know, when I was about your age, I was cut from my school's math team." This revelation finally caused Ethan to look up. "Really? But you're good at maths." "I am now," James agreed. "But back then I struggled with geometry. I could do the calculations, but I couldn't visualize the problems." "What did you do?" "I practiced. Every day after school, I drew geometric shapes and worked through problems until the visualization became second nature." James leaned forward slightly. "The thing is, Ethan, failure isn't permanent unless you decide it is." Ethan considered this, absently arranging his cards in batting average order. "Did you get back on the math team?" "I did. By the next semester, I was team captain." James smiled at the memory. But even if I hadn't made it back, the skills I developed while trying made me better at other things. I've been practicing, Ethan protested. It's not helping. Maybe you need to practice differently, James suggested. Sometimes the problem isn't effort, it's approach. A spark of interest flickered in Ethan's eyes. What do you mean? Well, batting is a complex skill. It involves timing, eye-hand coordination, stance, grip. Maybe we need to analyze which part of your technique needs adjustment. Like debugging a program? Ethan asked, using a coding term that made James smile with recognition. Exactly like that. We identify the specific problem, then fix just that part of the code. For the first time that evening, Ethan's expression brightened. Could you help me? Of course, James replied, feeling a surge of paternal pride at being asked. How about we go to the batting cages this weekend? I played some baseball in college. I might be able to spot what's happening. By the time Caroline called them for dinner, Ethan's mood had improved considerably. As they ate, he explained to his mother their plan to debug his batting technique, his earlier dejection replaced by determined optimism. That Saturday, James took Ethan to an indoor batting facility in Chelsea. He watched carefully as his son took swing after swing, noting the slight hitch in his motion, the tendency to drop his back shoulder. Try keeping your elbow up, James suggested after several rounds. Like this. He demonstrated the proper form. Ethan adjusted his stance, looking to James for approval before taking another swing. The connection was noticeably better, the ball sailing with improved trajectory. That felt different, Ethan said, surprise evident in his voice. Good different? Or bad different? Good different. Stronger. They spent 2 hours at the facility, working through various adjustments and filming Ethan's swings on James's phone for analysis. By the end of the session, Ethan was connecting consistently, his confidence visibly restored. Thanks, Dad, he said as they packed up the equipment, the first time he had called James Dad directly, rather than just referring to him that way when speaking to others. The simple word hit James with unexpected force. He turned away briefly, using the pretense of gathering their things to compose himself. You're welcome, son, he replied, when he could trust his voice again. That evening, Caroline called James after Ethan had gone to bed. Whatever you said to him today really helped, she told him. He hasn't been this excited about baseball in weeks. He won't stop talking about the debugging process. He's a quick learner, James replied. Smart, too, making that connection between coding and athletic technique. There was a brief pause before Caroline said, He called you Dad. So she had noticed. Yes. Is that okay with you? Another pause. It's not about what's okay with me, James. It's about what feels right to him, and apparently you're becoming someone he sees as a father, not just biologically but functionally. The implication was clear. James was earning the title through his actions, not merely claiming it through DNA. Thank you for giving me the chance to be that for him, James said sincerely. Caroline's voice softened. You're doing well with him, James. Better than I expected. The qualified praise meant more coming from her than effusive compliments would have from anyone else. Caroline had always been his harshest critic, primarily because she saw him most clearly. I'm trying, he said simply. I know, she replied. That's what matters. As fall turned to winter, these moments of connection became more frequent. Ethan regained his starting position on the baseball team. James attended every game he could, learning the names and quirks of Ethan's teammates, befriending other parents who were initially wary of the billionaire in their midst, but gradually accepted him as just another father cheering from the sidelines. For James, the change was both external and internal. His colleagues remarked on his improved mood, the new energy he brought to meetings. Several board members noted that his business decisions seemed more considered, less ruthlessly profit-focused. He began investigating the company's impact on communities and families, instituting new policies for parental leave and childcare support. One cold December evening, Caroline invited James to stay for movie night after dinner. Another first. As the three of them settled on the couch with popcorn and hot chocolate to watch one of Ethan's favorite science fiction films, James experienced a profound sense of contentment that had eluded him throughout his years of accumulated wealth and power. Midway through the movie, Ethan fell asleep, his head resting against James's shoulder. James sat perfectly still, afraid to disturb this physical manifestation of trust. Across the darkened room, his eyes met Caroline's. The guarded expression she usually maintained in his presence had softened into something more complex. "He trusts you," she whispered, nodding toward their sleeping son. "I know," James replied quietly. "I won't let him down." Caroline studied him for a long moment before responding. "I believe you." 3 simple words that represented a seismic shift in their relationship. After months of careful supervision and measured permission, Caroline was finally acknowledging what James had been working so hard to prove, that he could be trusted with their son's emotional well-being. As the credits rolled on the movie, neither made a move to wake Ethan or turn on the lights. In the blue glow of the television screen, James finally asked the question that had been on his mind for weeks. Would it be possible for Ethan to stay with me sometimes? Not full weekends yet, if that feels too soon. Maybe just an overnight occasionally. In the past, such a request would have been met with immediate resistance. Now Caroline considered it thoughtfully. "He has been asking about your place," she admitted, "wondering what it's like." "I have a room prepared for him," James said. "Nothing excessive," he added quickly, knowing Caroline's discomfort with ostentatious displays of wealth. "Just a comfortable space that's his." Caroline was quiet for so long that James thought she might be formulating a rejection. Finally, she said, "The winter break is coming up. Maybe he could spend a night during that time if he wants to." It was a small concession, carefully qualified, but to James it represented a monumental breakthrough. "Thank you, Caroline." She nodded, her expression impossible to read in the dim light. "This wasn't the plan, you know." "What wasn't?" "When you saw us at the baseball game," Caroline clarified, "I never intended for you to become part of his life. I thought it would be a disaster, that you'd either try to take over with your money and influence, or lose interest when the novelty wore off." The assessment stung, but James couldn't deny its logic based on his past behavior. "What changed your mind?" Caroline's gaze shifted to their sleeping son. "You did. The way you've prioritized him. The way you talk to him, not at him. The way you've been patient with the process instead of demanding immediate access as your right." She smiled faintly. "You've changed, James." Had he? James wondered. Or had the potential always been there, merely waiting for something valuable enough to warrant his full attention? "I think," he said carefully, "that I finally found something more important than success." Caroline's expression softened further. "That's exactly the change I'm talking about. The James I was married to would never have said that." As James gently carried the still sleeping Ethan to his bedroom, he reflected on Caroline's words. The man he had been, driven, ruthless, emotionally unavailable, seemed increasingly foreign to him now. That man had built an empire, but had never known the simple joy of a child's trusting weight in his arms. When he returned to the living room, Caroline was clearing away the popcorn bowls. There was a new awkwardness between them, a sense of boundaries shifting, of old wounds beginning to heal. "I should go," James said, reaching for his coat. Caroline nodded, walking him to the door. Before he stepped into the hallway, she placed a hand on his arm, the first time she had voluntarily touched him since their reunion. "I'm glad he found you, James," she said quietly. "Or that you found him. I'm not sure yet which way to look at it." As James rode the elevator down to the lobby, he realized that for the first time in his adult life, his sense of identity was untethered from his professional achievements. The accomplishments that had defined him for decades, the acquisitions, the market domination, the billions in his accounts, suddenly seemed hollow compared to the simple fact that his son had fallen asleep against his shoulder, completely trusting. Back in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, James stood at the window, watching the snow begin to fall. The city stretched out below him, a glittering expanse that had once represented everything he valued: power, prestige, possibility. Now, his gaze kept returning to the child's room he had carefully prepared, wondering if the color scheme was right, if the books he'd selected would appeal to Ethan, if the space would feel welcoming rather than intimidating. His phone buzzed with a text from Carolyn. Ethan woke up and was disappointed he didn't get to say goodnight. "He wants to know if you're still coming to his science fair on Tuesday." James typed his reply. "Wouldn't miss it for anything." And for the first time in his life, that statement was absolutely true. No business opportunity, no matter how lucrative, could compete with the importance of being present for his son. Ethan's first overnight stay at James's penthouse came during the winter break, just after Christmas. James had spent days preparing, reviewing every detail of the space to ensure it would be welcoming. He'd consulted with a child psychologist about the transition, read countless articles about co-parenting, and even practiced cooking Ethan's favorite meals with his private chefs. None of it fully prepared him for the moment Caroline and Ethan arrived at his door. Ethan clutching an overnight bag and his favorite chess set, eyes wide with excitement and a touch of apprehension. "Wow," Ethan breathed as he stepped into the penthouse foyer, taking in the soaring ceilings and panoramic views of snow-covered Central Park. "This is where you live?" "It is," James replied, suddenly seeing his home through his son's eyes. The minimalist decor that might seem cold rather than elegant. The impressive art collection that spoke of wealth rather than warmth. "Let me show you your room." The bedroom James had prepared for Ethan was a stark departure from the rest of the penthouse. Where the main living areas featured monochromatic color schemes and museum-quality art, Ethan's room was painted a warm blue with accents of red. A telescope stood by the window, positioned for optimal stargazing. Bookshelves were filled with age-appropriate novels, science books, and coding manuals. A desk held a state-of-the-art computer configured for both gaming and programming. The bed was adorned with a comforter featuring baseball motifs. "This is all for me?" Ethan asked, setting down his bag and immediately gravitating toward the telescope. "All for you," James confirmed. "Do you like it?" Ethan nodded enthusiastically, already adjusting the telescope's focus. "Can you see stars from here even with all the city lights?" "Some of the brighter ones," James said, "and planets are quite visible. Saturn's rings are particularly clear with this model." Caroline stood in the doorway, watching their interaction with a thoughtful expression. "This is very nice, James. Not too over the top." He recognized the restrained compliment for what it was. Acknowledgement of his effort to respect her values while creating a space for their son. "I tried to make it comfortable, not extravagant." Indeed, the telescope computer and astronomical ceiling projector had cost more than many people's entire homes, but by his standards, James had indeed shown remarkable restraint. "Well," Caroline said, checking her watch, "I should probably get going. You have my number if you need anything, and I'm only 20 minutes away." James sensed her anxiety, despite her composed exterior. "We'll be fine," he assured her. "I've planned a very boring evening. Make your own pizza, chess, and maybe a movie, if we have time before bed." Caroline nodded, then turned to Ethan, who was already exploring the built-in bookshelves. "Come give me a hug goodbye, honey." Ethan bounded over, wrapping his arms around his mother. "Bye, Mom. See you tomorrow." "Be good for your dad," she said, holding him perhaps a moment longer than usual. "Call me if you need anything." Ethan complained good-naturedly, pulling away. "I'll be fine. I'm almost 9, you know." "I know," Caroline smiled, touching his cheek gently. "That's practically grown up." After one last look around the room, she nodded to James and headed for the door. He followed her to the foyer, leaving Ethan engrossed in examining his new space. "Thank you for this," James said quietly. "I know it wasn't an easy decision." "It wasn't," Caroline agreed, "but it's the right one. He needs you in his life, James. Not just as a weekend visitor or occasional dinner guest." The acknowledgement coming from Caroline after months of carefully controlled interactions felt monumental. "I won't let either of you down," he promised. A small smile touched her lips. "I know. That's why we're here." She hesitated, then added, "You're not the same man I left, James. I'm not sure when exactly that happened, but I'm glad it did," she finished simply. After she left, James found Ethan in his room, already setting up the sophisticated electronic chessboard on the desk. "Want to play?" Ethan challenged. "I've been practicing with the chess club at school." "Absolutely," James agreed, pulling up a chair. "But I should warn you, I was state champion in high school." Ethan grinned. "Good. I like a challenge." They played 3 games before moving to the kitchen to make pizza. James had prepared dough in advance and set out an array of toppings. He watched with amusement as Ethan methodically organized his ingredients before beginning. Pepperoni in precise rows, olives evenly spaced, cheese carefully measured for optimal coverage. "You're very exact," James observed. Ethan nodded seriously. "Mom says I get that from you. She says you always had to have everything just so." The comment caught James by surprise. Not just the observation itself, but the casual way Caroline apparently discussed him with their son. "She talks about me?" "Sometimes," Ethan replied, adding another perfectly positioned pepperoni slice. "She said you were always super organized, and that's why you're good at business. But she said sometimes you organized fun right out of life." The assessment was so brutally accurate that James laughed despite himself. "Your mother always did see me clearly," he acknowledged. Ethan looked up from his pizza creation. "She doesn't say bad stuff about you, if that's what you're worried about. Even before I met you, she just said you were very focused on your work. She said that's not bad, just different from what she wanted." James felt a surge of gratitude toward Caroline for her measured approach, for not poisoning their son against him despite having ample justification. "Oh, your mother is a remarkable woman," he said sincerely. "Oh, yeah, she's pretty cool," Ethan agreed, oblivious to the complex emotions behind James' statement. "Can we put the pizzas in now?" After dinner, they watched the latest Star Wars film in James's home theater, complete with reclining seats and a professional-grade sound system. James found himself watching Ethan more than the movie, memorizing his expressions of delight, his startled jumps during action sequences, the way he recited certain lines along with the characters, clearly having seen the film before. When it was time for bed, James experienced a moment of parental uncertainty. He'd never put a child to bed before. Didn't know the routines, the rituals, the expectations. "Do you need anything?" he asked awkwardly as Ethan changed into pajamas. "Water? Another pillow?" Ethan shook his head. "I'm good, but Mom usually checks that I brushed my teeth properly." Relieved to have clear instructions, James dutifully inspected Ethan's dental work, then watched as his son climbed into bed. "Mom reads sometimes," Ethan offered, sensing James's uncertainty. "But I'm pretty old for that now." "I see," James nodded, still standing somewhat stiffly by the bedside. "Well then, good night." "Good night, Dad," Ethan replied, snuggling down into the covers. James turned off the light and was halfway out the door when Ethan's voice stopped him. "Dad, thanks for my room. It's really awesome." A warm feeling spread through James's chest. "You're welcome, son. Sleep well." Later, as James sat in his office reviewing quarterly projections, old habits died hard. His phone buzzed with a text from Caroline. "Everything okay?" He typed back, "All good. He beat me at chess. We made pizza. Watched Star Wars. He's asleep now." Her reply came quickly. "He beat you at chess? Really?" James smiled at the skepticism. "I may have let him win the third game." 3 dots appeared then. "No, you didn't. You hate losing more than anyone I've ever met." She was right, of course. The James Whitfield of old would have crushed any opponent without mercy, regardless of age or relationship. But something had shifted in him over these past months. "He's good," James replied simply. "He thinks 3 moves ahead already. With proper training, he could be exceptional." Caroline's response took longer this time. "Thank you for seeing him. The real him, not just what you want him to be." Though the message struck James with unexpected force, laying bare one of his deepest fears, that he might project his own ambitions onto his son rather than nurturing Ethan's unique personhood. It was what his own father had done to him, creating a legacy of achievement, but also emotional distance. "I'm trying," he wrote back. "I know," came her response. "Good night, James." The next morning, James woke early, half expecting to find Ethan already up and exploring. Instead, he had to gently wake his son at 8:30, amused to discover that unlike his early rising father, Ethan preferred to sleep in when given the chance. Over breakfast, chocolate chip pancakes that James had practiced making several times in preparation, they planned their day. The forecast called for fresh snow, perfect for the sledding in Central Park that James had promised. As they bundled up in winter gear, James realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd done something as frivolous as sledding. Certainly not since college, possibly not since childhood. His adult life had been a relentless pursuit of success, with little room for simple pleasures. Central Park was transformed by the overnight snowfall, the familiar landscapes rendered magical under pristine white. James had arranged for 2 professional-grade sleds to be delivered, their sleek designs a far cry from the plastic discs and cafeteria trays of his youth. "Race you to the bottom," Ethan challenged, positioning his sled at the top of Cedar Hill. For the next 2 hours, James Whitfield, CEO of a global investment firm, repeatedly climbed a snowy hill and slid down it on a piece of molded plastic, his son's laughter providing all the incentive he needed to continue, despite burning lungs and soaked trousers. "Dad, watch this," Ethan called before attempting a particularly daring run that ended with him tumbling spectacularly into a snowbank. James rushed over, heart in his throat, only to find Ethan emerging from the snow like a triumphant explorer, grinning from ear to ear. "Did you see that crash? It was epic." Relaxing at the realization that his son was unharmed, James found himself laughing, not the measured chuckle he employed in business settings, but a genuine, full-bodied laugh that felt foreign and wonderful. "I think that deserves hot chocolate," he declared, brushing snow from Ethan's coat. "There's a place at the edge of the park that makes the best in Manhattan." As they sat in the cozy cafe, hands wrapped around steaming mugs topped with artisanal marshmallows, James studied his son's flushed, happy face and felt a profound sense of peace. "This was the best day ever," Ethan declared, his approval categorical in the way only children can manage. "It was," James agreed sincerely. "Better than closing any deal." Ethan cocked his head curiously. "You really like being a dad, don't you?" The simple question momentarily robbed James of words. "I do," he finally managed. "More than I ever expected to." Is it hard? Ethan persisted. Learning how to be a dad when you didn't get to practice when I was little? James was continually amazed by his son's perceptiveness. It is hard sometimes, he admitted. I worry about making mistakes. Ethan considered this, stirring the remains of his hot chocolate thoughtfully. Mom says everyone makes mistakes as parents. She says she makes them all the time. Your mother is very wise, James said. Yeah, Ethan agreed casually. She also says what matters isn't avoiding mistakes but fixing them when they happen. Out of the mouths of babes, James thought, marveling at the profound truth delivered so matter-of-factly by his 8-year-old son. When they returned to the penthouse to change into dry clothes before Caroline arrived, James was struck by how naturally Ethan now moved through the space, not as a visitor, but as someone who belonged. It was a subtle shift, but a significant one. Caroline arrived promptly at 3, her gaze sweeping over her son as if conducting a wellness check. Did you have fun? It was awesome, Ethan exclaimed, launching into a detailed account of their sledding adventures, chess matches, and pizza creations. As Ethan chatted on, James noticed Caroline watching him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher, not the wary assessment he'd grown accustomed to over the past months, but something more complex. Would you like to stay for coffee? James offered, when Ethan paused for breath. Or tea? Actually, Caroline said, I thought we might all go to the Natural History Museum. There's a new exhibit on space exploration that Ethan's been wanting to see. The invitation to join them rather than simply return Ethan caught James by surprise. I'd like that, he said carefully, trying not to read too much into the gesture. Ethan's face lit up. Both of you? Together? If your father doesn't have other plans, Caroline qualified. No plans, James assured them quickly. The museum sounds perfect. As they walked through the magnificent halls of the museum later that afternoon, James found himself hyper-aware of their appearance. A family group for all intents and purposes, though not quite a family. Ethan moved happily between them, grabbing James's hand to pull him toward a particularly interesting display. Then taking Caroline's to show her something else, physically connecting his parents even as they maintained their emotional distance. At one point, as they stood watching a demonstration of planetary orbits, Caroline leaned toward James and said quietly, You look different. Different how? He asked, puzzled. Happier, she clarified. More present. James considered this assessment. I feel different, like I've been seeing everything in black and white for years, and suddenly there's color. Caroline nodded, as if this made perfect sense. Parenthood has a way of doing that. Is that how it was for you? James asked, genuinely curious about her early experience with their son. Yes and no, Caroline replied thoughtfully. There was the color, certainly, but also the fear and exhaustion of doing it alone. The implicit reproach stung, but James accepted it as his due. I'm sorry I wasn't there. You're here now, she said simply, then moved away to join Ethan at the next exhibit, leaving James to absorb the weight of her words. You're here now. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of something like it. That evening, after dropping Caroline and Ethan at their apartment, James found himself lingering in Ethan's room at the penthouse, straightening already tidy shelves, adjusting the telescope's position, smiling at the rumpled bedspread that bore evidence of his son's presence. His phone rang. Frank, his head of security, calling about an urgent matter involving a potential hostile takeover of one of their Asian subsidiaries. 6 months ago, James would have dropped everything for such a crisis, working through the night to counter the threat. Now, he found himself irritated by the interruption of his reflections. Handle it, Frank, he instructed. Implement the contingency plan we discussed last quarter. I'll review everything in the morning. In the morning, Frank repeated, clearly surprised by his boss's uncharacteristic delegation. But sir, the Tokyo market opens in... "In the morning, Frank," James repeated firmly. "Some things are more important than market openings." As he ended the call, James realized he meant it completely. The company that had been his singular focus for decades was now secondary to the relationship he was building with his son. The revelation should have been terrifying to a man whose identity had been so thoroughly entwined with his professional success. Instead, it felt like freedom. Spring arrived with a gentle transformation of Central Park and a more profound evolution in the relationship between James, Caroline, and Ethan. The tentative co-parenting arrangement had gradually solidified into a reliable routine. Ethan stayed with James one night each week and every other weekend. They had family dinners twice weekly, sometimes at Caroline's apartment, sometimes at restaurants, and occasionally at James's penthouse, where his chef delighted in preparing Ethan's increasingly adventurous culinary requests. What had begun as parallel parenting with minimal interaction between the adults had softened into something more collaborative. James consulted Caroline before making decisions about Ethan. Caroline included James in parent-teacher conferences and medical appointments. They presented a united front on matters of discipline and expectations, despite their different parenting styles. As April bloomed, Ethan's 9th birthday approached. Planning the celebration became a joint project that brought James and Caroline into frequent contact. They met for coffee one afternoon, while Ethan was at baseball practice, to finalize the details. "He wants a coding-themed party," Caroline explained, showing James the invitation design on her tablet. "With a cake shaped like a computer." James smiled, unsurprised by their technology-loving son's request. "I can arrange for some interactive coding stations, age-appropriate challenges the kids could solve for prizes." Caroline nodded appreciatively. "That would be perfect. Much better than my idea of programming themed word searches. What do you?" Their collaboration was interrupted by the arrival of Caroline's department chair, who spotted her through the cafe window and stopped to discuss an upcoming faculty meeting. James watched as Caroline engaged professionally with her colleague, struck by how little he knew about her current life. In the months since reuniting through Ethan, their conversations had centered almost exclusively on their son. "Sorry about that," Caroline said as her colleague departed. "End of semester academic politics?" "You seem to have a good relationship with your department," James observed. "I do," Caroline confirmed. "I'm up for tenure next year, actually." James raised his eyebrows, genuinely impressed. "That's significant. Congratulations." "It's not a done deal yet," Caroline demurred, though he could see the pride in her eyes. "The competition is fierce, and publishing while teaching a full course load and parenting isn't easy." "You've published recently?" James asked, realizing how little he knew about her professional accomplishments. "A book on female protagonists in modern American literature last year, and several journal articles since then," Caroline replied. "The book did surprisingly well for an academic text, even got some mainstream attention." James felt a pang of something like regret. During their marriage, Caroline had been working on her dissertation, her academic ambitions often taking a back seat to his career. He had supported her financially, but had shown little interest in her intellectual pursuits. "I'd like to read it," he said sincerely. "Your book." Caroline looked surprised, then skeptical. "It's hardly your usual reading material." "I'd still like to read it," James insisted. "I should know what Ethan's mother has accomplished." A faint blush colored Caroline's cheeks. "I'll bring you a copy," she promised, then quickly returned to the safer topic of birthday planning. "About the guest list. Ethan wants to invite his entire class plus his baseball team. Is that all right with you?" "Of course," James agreed. "The more the merrier." "That's easy for you to say," Caroline smiled ruefully. "You have staff to help with setup and cleanup." "You could use them too," James offered. "For the birthday and whenever," Really, the household staff are at your disposal. James, Caroline's tone held a warning note he recognized from their marriage, her signal that he was overstepping. Not as a handout, he clarified quickly, as a co-parenting resource. If it makes Ethan's life better or yours easier, why not utilize it? Caroline considered this, her natural independence warring with practicality. I'll think about it, she conceded, which from Caroline was tantamount to agreement. The birthday party itself was a resounding success, held in a converted industrial space in Brooklyn that James had transformed into coding-themed wonderland. It featured interactive programming challenges, virtual reality stations, a DJ playing Ethan's favorite music, and the requested computer-shaped cake that tasted even better than it looked. James and Caroline moved through the celebration in perfect synchronization, she handling the emotional dynamics of 24 nine-year-olds, he ensuring the logistical elements ran smoothly. From the outside, they must have appeared to be a perfectly functioning parental unit, their past estrangement invisible to casual observers. "Your parents are so cool," James overheard one of Ethan's friends say. "My dad doesn't even know how to run the dishwasher, and your dad set up this whole amazing party. And my mom made sure everybody got invited, even the kids nobody likes," Ethan replied proudly. "She says celebrations should include everyone." The exchange warmed James deeply, not just the compliment to his organizational skills, but the evidence that Ethan valued both his parents' contributions equally. As the party wound down and exhausted children were collected by their parents, James found himself standing beside Caroline, watching Ethan demonstrate his new programming kit to his two closest friends, who were staying for a sleepover at Caroline's apartment. "We did good," James said quietly. "As a team." Caroline nodded, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "We did. Who would have thought?" "Thank you," James said suddenly, the words bursting from him with unexpected urgency. "For what?" Caroline looked genuinely puzzled. "For raising him so well for all those years," James clarified. "For giving me a chance to know him now. For," he hesitated, "for not hating me, even though you had every right to." Caroline was silent for a long moment. "I don't think I ever really hated you, James. I was hurt, and then angry, and then, I don't know, resigned. I created a life that didn't include you. And it was a good life." "It is a good life," James agreed, looking around at the evidence of her success, the respected academic career, the network of friends who clearly adored her, and most importantly, the remarkable child they had created together. "You did beautifully without me." "Yes," Caroline acknowledged without false modesty. "But that doesn't mean Ethan isn't better off with you in his life. He is." She hesitated, then added, "And maybe I am too." Before James could process this surprising admission, they were interrupted by Ethan bounding over, high on sugar and birthday excitement. "This was the best party ever," he declared, flinging his arms around both their waists in a three-way hug. For a suspended moment, James allowed himself to enjoy the sensation of family. His son's exuberant embrace, Caroline's arm brushing against his behind Ethan's back, the shared joy of having created this happiness together. Then Ethan was off again, racing back to his friends, and the adults stepped carefully apart. "I should get the boys to the apartment for the sleepover," Caroline said, her voice slightly higher than normal. "The car service is waiting." "Of course," James nodded, suddenly aware of a tension that hadn't been present minutes before. "I'll have the gifts delivered tomorrow." As he watched them leave, Ethan with his friends and Caroline deftly herding the overexcited boys, James found himself replaying Caroline's words, "And maybe I am too." What exactly had she meant? That co-parenting with him was easier than single parenting, that she appreciated his financial contributions to Ethan's upbringing, or something more personal? For the first time since discovering Ethan's existence, James allowed himself to consider a possibility he had deliberately avoided, that their reconnection through their son might lead to a reconciliation between them as well. The thought was simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. He had lost Caroline once through his own neglect and misplaced priorities. The idea of a second chance seemed almost too much to hope for. And yet, there had been moments over these past months when the old chemistry between them had flared briefly, when her guard had lowered enough to reveal the woman he had fallen in love with years ago. James was still contemplating this possibility the following week, when he received an unexpected call from Caroline late one evening. "James?" Her voice sounded strained. "I'm sorry to bother you so late." "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, alert to the tension in her tone. "It's probably nothing, but Ethan has a fever of 102, and he's complaining about pain in his right side. I'm taking him to the emergency room as a precaution." "Appendicitis," James guessed, already reaching for his keys. "That's what I'm worried about," Caroline confirmed. "We're heading to Mount Sinai." "I'll meet you there," James said, already moving toward the door. "Do you want me to send a car for you?" "We're already in a taxi," Caroline replied. "Just hurry, please." The fear in her voice accelerated James's movements. In the elevator down to his private garage, he made a quick call to the hospital's chief of surgery, a golf buddy whose children's college funds were heavily invested in Whitfield global portfolios. By the time he reached his car, arrangements had been made for the hospital's top pediatric surgeon to be notified. The emergency room was predictably chaotic when James arrived, but he was immediately directed to a private examination room where Caroline sat beside a pale, uncomfortable-looking Ethan. "Dad?" Ethan's relief at seeing him was palpable. "Mom says they might have to do surgery." "Only if necessary," James assured him, moving to the bedside and taking his son's hand. "And if they do, it's a very simple procedure. You'd be back to normal in no time." He glanced at Caroline, whose face showed the strain of parental worry. "Any news yet?" "They've ordered an ultrasound," she replied. "The doctor seems pretty sure it's appendicitis based on the symptoms." James nodded, then leaned close to Ethan. "You know what's cool about appendix surgery? You get to keep your appendix in a jar if you want to." "I did." This distraction worked as intended, prompting a series of increasingly gross questions from Ethan that momentarily diverted him from his discomfort and fear. Caroline shot James a grateful look over their son's head. When the doctor arrived to confirm the diagnosis, James and Caroline listened to the explanation of the laparoscopic procedure with the shared focus of parents united in concern for their child. "We'll perform the surgery as soon as the OR is ready," the doctor explained. "Probably within the hour. It's a straightforward procedure with minimal recovery time." As the medical team prepared Ethan for surgery, Caroline and James stood together in the corridor outside the preparation room. "He'll be fine," James assured her, seeing the worry etched on her face. "Appendectomies are routine." "I know," Caroline nodded. "Logically, I know that, but he's our son, and nothing feels routine when it's him," James finished, understanding completely. Caroline looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Without thinking, James pulled her into his arms, offering the comfort of human contact. She stiffened momentarily, then relaxed against his chest, accepting the embrace. "He'll be fine," James repeated, his chin resting gently on the top of her head. "He's strong and resilient, just like his mother." They stood that way for several minutes, drawing strength from each other, until a nurse approached to inform them that Ethan was being taken to the operating room. "You can see him briefly before the anesthesia," the nurse explained, leading them to the pre-op area. Ethan looked small and vulnerable on the gurney, but managed a brave smile when he saw them. "The nurse says I'll have cool scars to show my friends," he told them, clearly focusing on what he considered the upside. "Very small scars." the anesthesiologist corrected with a smile. "But yes, you'll have bragging rights. We'll be right here waiting when you wake up," Caroline promised, brushing Ethan's hair back from his forehead. "Both of us," James added, squeezing his son's hand. "And when you're feeling better, we'll get you that new coding program you've been talking about." Ethan's eyes brightened despite his discomfort. "The professional one? Really?" "Really," James confirmed. "Something to look forward to during recovery." As they watched the medical team wheel their son toward the operating room, Caroline reached for James' hand, gripping it tightly. He returned the pressure, offering what reassurance he could through this simple connection. The waiting period was a special kind of parental torture, time stretching endlessly while their imaginations conjured unlikely complications. They sat together in a private waiting room, making sporadic attempts at conversation before lapsing back into anxious silence. "This is the hardest part of parenting," Caroline said eventually. "The absolute helplessness when they're suffering and you can't fix it." James nodded, understanding this truth despite his limited parenting experience. "I don't know how you did this alone all those years." Caroline smiled faintly. "You do what you have to do, but it is nice not to be alone tonight." Before James could respond, the surgeon appeared in the doorway, still in his surgical scrubs. Both parents tensed, rising to their feet in perfect synchronization. "Everything went perfectly," the doctor assured them immediately. "Classic appendicitis, caught before rupture. He's in recovery now and should be able to go home tomorrow if all goes well." The relief that washed over James was physical in its intensity. Beside him, Caroline let out a small sob, quickly stifled behind her hand. "When can we see him?" James asked, his arm instinctively going around Caroline's shoulders. "He'll be in recovery for about an hour, then move to a private room," the surgeon explained. "You can see him once he's settled, though he'll be groggy from the anesthesia." After the doctor left, Caroline turned to James, her professional composure momentarily abandoned. "Thank you for being here," she said simply. "For everything." "Where else would I be?" James replied, the question entirely rhetorical. Nothing could have kept him from his son's side in a crisis. No business emergency, no financial opportunity, nothing. They were allowed to see Ethan shortly after midnight, finding him sleepy but alert in a private room decorated incongruously with cartoon characters. The sight of their son, pale but safe, with an IV in his arm but breathing steadily, was a profound relief to both parents. "How are you feeling, champ?" James asked, taking a seat beside the bed. "Weird," Ethan replied, his voice slightly slurred from lingering anesthesia. "But not as hurty anymore." Caroline smiled at the childish term, running a gentle hand over Ethan's cheek. "That's good. The doctor says you did great." "Did they let you keep it?" Ethan asked James, clearly remembering their earlier conversation. "My appendix?" James laughed, delighted by his son's resilience. "We'll have to ask the doctor tomorrow. I'm not sure they do that anymore." As Ethan drifted back to sleep, James and Caroline settled into the uncomfortable visitor chairs on either side of the bed, prepared for a long night of vigil. "You should go home and rest," James suggested, noting the exhaustion evident in Caroline's posture. "I can stay with him tonight." She shook her head definitively. "I'm not leaving him." "Then at least take the recliner," James insisted, indicating the slightly more comfortable chair in the corner. "You can still see him from there, and you might actually get some sleep." This compromise Caroline accepted, though she made James promise to wake her if Ethan needed anything or if his condition changed in any way. As the night deepened, James watched over his sleeping son and the mother of his child, both now resting peacefully. The hospital room, with its antiseptic smell and rhythmic beeping monitors, seemed an unlikely setting for an epiphany, yet that was precisely what James experienced in those quiet hours. The revelation wasn't dramatic or sudden, but rather a quiet acknowledgement of what had been gradually dawning on him for months, that the life he had built, impressive on paper but emotionally barren, was not the life he wanted moving forward. Watching his ex-wife sleeping in an uncomfortable hospital chair out of devotion to their son, James recognized that the value of his vast financial empire paled in comparison to the wealth contained in this room, the love of family, the privilege of being needed, the profound joy of connection. Whether or not there was a possibility of reconciliation with Caroline remained unclear, but James knew with absolute certainty that maintaining his relationship with Ethan would be his primary focus going forward. Any business decisions, investment strategies, or corporate expansions would be evaluated first and foremost by their impact on his ability to be present for his son. It was, he realized, the most liberating decision he had ever made. 1 year after that fateful baseball game, James Whitfield stood on the rooftop terrace of his penthouse, watching as caterers arranged tables for Ethan's 10th birthday celebration. The space had been transformed with interactive science displays, a virtual reality gaming station, and a telescope positioned for stargazing later in the evening. "The astronomy professor from Columbia will be here at 8, Megan reminded him, checking items off her tablet. "And the cake is scheduled for delivery at 6:30. "Perfect," James nodded, surveying the preparations with satisfaction. "Is the gift ready?" "Wrapped and waiting in your office," Megan confirmed. "Though I still think it's excessive for a 10-year-old. James smiled at his assistant's candor. In the past year, his entire staff had adjusted to the presence of a child in their boss's life, and to the profound changes that had resulted from that presence. "It's not just for him," James explained. "It's for both of them." The gift in question, papers establishing a foundation in Ethan's name with Caroline as executive director, represented months of careful planning. The foundation would focus on educational access for underprivileged children, with particular emphasis on STEM programs for students showing aptitude but lacking resources. The initial endowment was substantial enough to fund operations for decades. While James knew the financial scale might make Caroline uncomfortable, he had structured it carefully to give her complete operational control while keeping the administrative burden minimal. It was, he hoped, a gift that honored both her values and their son's growing interest in using privilege to help others, a trait James was particularly proud to see developing. The elevator chimed, and James turned to see Caroline and Ethan stepping onto the terrace, both dressed for the party. "Dad!" Ethan bounded forward, more physically demonstrative at 10 than he had been at 9. "Mom let me open one present early. Look." He held up the latest model smartphone, clearly delighted. "With strict usage guidelines," Caroline added, following at a more measured pace. "No screen time after 8. Limited social media access, and his location services stay on." "Sensible," James agreed, though privately he thought the restrictions excessive. Co-parenting had taught him the value of presenting a united front, even when their approaches differed. "The party looks amazing," Caroline commented, taking in the sophisticated decorations that managed to be appropriate for a child without being childish. "You've outdone yourselves." "I had help," James acknowledged, gesturing to his staff who were putting the finishing touches on the space. "How was the school ceremony?" Earlier that day, Ethan had received an Academic Achievement Award at a special year-end assembly. James had been scheduled to attend, but had been caught in an emergency board meeting that couldn't be rescheduled. "It was great," Ethan answered before Caroline could. "My coding project won first place. Ms. Delaney said it was remarkably sophisticated for someone my age." He quoted his teacher with obvious pride. "That's wonderful," James said, pushing aside the pang of regret at having missed the moment. "I want to hear all about the project later." As Ethan wandered off to inspect the virtual reality station, Caroline moved closer to James. "He was disappointed you weren't there," she said quietly, not accusatory but matter-of-fact. "I know," James acknowledged. The board meeting was unavoidable, a potential hostile takeover that needed immediate attention. Caroline nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You know, a year ago, I would have seen that as proof that work still came first for you. Now I just see it as an unfortunate scheduling conflict." James recognized the comment for what it was, acknowledgement of how far they'd come. "Thank you for understanding." "I do understand," Caroline confirmed. "You've proven your priorities these past months. One missed school event doesn't erase all the baseball games, science projects, and bedtime stories you've shown up for." The validation meant more coming from her than it would have from anyone else. Caroline had always been his harshest critic, and therefore his most meaningful source of approval. As guests began to arrive, Ethan's friends and their parents, many of whom James now knew well from baseball games and school events, James found himself reflecting on the transformation of the past year. Professionally, he had undertaken a gradual but significant restructuring of Whitfield Global Investments, delegating operational control to his longtime CFO while maintaining strategic oversight. The transition had freed him to be present for Ethan while still guiding the company's overall direction. To the surprise of many on Wall Street, profits had actually increased under this arrangement. James's strategic vision, it turned out, was sharper when not diluted by day-to-day operational concerns. Personally, the changes were even more profound. The penthouse had been renovated to include not just Ethan's room, but a dedicated family space where gaming tournaments and movie nights regularly occurred. His schedule now included a standing chess match with his son every Sunday morning, baseball practices on Wednesdays, and family dinners 3 times weekly. And then there was Caroline. Their co-parenting relationship had evolved gradually from cautious cooperation to genuine partnership. The night of Ethan's appendectomy had marked a turning point, a shared crisis that reminded them both of what they'd once meant to each other. In the months that followed, their interactions had softened, the old wounds seemingly less raw. They still maintained separate residences and separate lives beyond Ethan, but there had been moments, a lingering look over dinner, hands touching as they both reached for something, conversations that extended well beyond parenting matters, that suggested the possibility of something more. James had been careful not to press for that something more, wary of disrupting the delicate balance they had achieved. Caroline had been hurt deeply by their marriage's failure. Trust, once broken, could not be demanded back. It had to be earned incrementally through consistent action rather than grand gestures. The birthday party progressed joyfully into evening. Ethan and his friends moved between activities with boundless energy, while their parents formed conversational groups that reflected the emerging social connections of the past year. James found himself genuinely enjoying the company of these other parents, people whose lives were vastly different from his in financial terms, but who shared the common bond of raising children in a complex world. As darkness fell, the astronomy professor arrived, setting up additional telescopes and guiding the excited children through observations of Jupiter's moons and Saturn's rings. James stood back, watching his son's face illuminated by wonder as he glimpsed cosmic distances. "He looks like you when he concentrates like that," Caroline said, appearing beside him with 2 glasses of wine. She handed one to James. "That intense focus, it's all Whitfield." James accepted the wine with a smile of thanks. But the excitement, the way he has to share what he's seeing with everyone around him, that's pure Matthews. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their son experience the joy of discovery. After a moment, Caroline spoke again, her tone deliberately casual. "I've been offered a visiting professor position at Oxford for next spring semester." James felt a sudden tightness in his chest. "Oxford? As in England?" Caroline nodded. "It's a significant opportunity professionally. a chance to work with several scholars in my field, access to rare manuscripts for my research. How long? James asked, struggling to keep his tone neutral. 4 months, Caroline replied. January through April. 4 months without seeing his son daily. 4 months of video calls instead of chess matches and baseball practices. The prospect was painful to contemplate. That's a wonderful opportunity, James managed, genuinely happy for her professional recognition despite his personal dismay. Congratulations. Caroline studied him for a moment before continuing. I've been considering whether to accept. It would mean significant adjustments for Ethan. James nodded, understanding the implicit question. He could stay with me while you're gone, he offered immediately. I'd ensure his routine remained as normal as possible. That's one option, Caroline agreed. But I was actually thinking about something else. She hesitated, then added, I was wondering if you might consider taking a leave of absence from work if you could manage the company remotely for a semester. James blinked in surprise. You want me to come to Oxford with you and Ethan? It would provide continuity for Ethan, Caroline explained, her gaze fixed on their son rather than James. And it would give you the chance to experience another culture with him. Educational travel was always something we talked about wanting for our children, back when we were planning a family. The casual reference to their past shared dreams caught James off guard. Caroline rarely alluded to their marriage, except in the context of its dissolution. I would need to make arrangements, James said carefully, not wanting to appear too eager, yet unwilling to let the opportunity pass. But yes, I think I could manage the company remotely for a semester. Caroline nodded, still watching Ethan, rather than meeting James's gaze. We could rent a house in the countryside. Ethan could attend the international school there. It would be different from our lives here. Different indeed. The prospect of 4 months living in proximity to Caroline and Ethan, experiencing daily family life without the buffers of separate residences and busy schedules, it was both appealing and terrifying. Caroline, James began, then paused, searching for the right words. Are you suggesting this solely for Ethan's benefit, or? She finally turned to face him directly. I think I've spent the past year watching you become the man I always hoped you could be, she said quietly. The father Ethan deserves, the partner I once believed in. James felt his heart rate accelerate. And I think perhaps we deserve a chance to see if there's still something between us worth rebuilding, Caroline finished. Away from the pressures and patterns of New York, a fresh perspective. Before James could respond, they were interrupted by Ethan rushing over, excited to share some astronomical discovery. The adult conversation was temporarily set aside as they both focused on their son's enthusiasm. Later, after the cake had been served and the astronomy professor had packed up his equipment, James found a moment to continue their conversation. Most of the guests had departed, leaving only Ethan and a few close friends playing a final round of virtual reality games under the supervision of James's staff. About Oxford, James began, joining Caroline at the terrace railing where she stood looking out over the city lights. I would like that very much. The chance to be there with both of you. Caroline smiled, the expression holding both warmth and caution. It wouldn't be a reconciliation exactly. More like an exploration, seeing who we are now, if those people fit together better than who we were before. An exploration sounds perfect, James agreed. No pressure. No expectations beyond being there for Ethan and seeing where things lead for us. Caroline nodded, her expression softening. You've surprised me this past year, James. I didn't think people could change so fundamentally. I'm not sure it was change so much as revelation, James reflected, Finding what truly matters tends to clarify one's priorities. They stood together, looking out at the Manhattan skyline, the city that had been the backdrop for both their initial romance and subsequent estrangement. Now it might become the place they left behind to rediscover each other. "Dad! Mom!" Ethan called from across the terrace. "Can we open presents now? Please!" The moment of adult conversation broken, they shared a smile of parental acknowledgement before turning toward their son. "Absolutely," James agreed. "In fact, I have a special one for you and your mom to open together." As Ethan tore into the stack of gifts with characteristic enthusiasm, James found himself filled with a contentment that his former self would never have understood. The ambitious young man who had prioritized wealth and power above all else could not have comprehended the richness found in these simple moments of family life. When Ethan finally reached the special gift, James explained carefully what the foundation would do and why it mattered. "It's in your name," he told his son, "but your mother will guide its work, helping children who don't have the advantages you have to get access to education in science, technology, and mathematics." Ethan considered this solemnly. "So other kids can learn coding and astronomy even if their parents don't have money?" "Exactly," James confirmed, warmed by his son's immediate understanding. "That's really cool," Ethan decided. Then, with a child's practical focus, he added, "Can we still open my other presents now?" The adults laughed, and the gift opening continued. Caroline discreetly squeezed James's hand, a wordless acknowledgement of what the foundation meant, not just philanthropically, but as a symbol of James's growing understanding of what truly constituted wealth. Later that night, after Ethan and his friends had been collected by their parents for sleepovers elsewhere, James and Caroline lingered on the terrace, neither quite ready to end the evening. "Thank you for the foundation," Caroline said finally. "It's a thoughtful gift, one that honors what's important to both of us." "It seemed right," James replied simply, "a way to use what I've built for something more meaningful than just accumulation." Caroline nodded, understanding the evolution this represented. "A year ago, I would never have believed we'd be here, planning a semester abroad together, considering a fresh start. A year ago, I was a different man," James acknowledged. "Or perhaps the same man, but with different priorities." "Life has a way of surprising us," Caroline mused. "That day at the baseball game, I was terrified when I saw you. I thought you'd either try to take Ethan from me or reject him entirely. I never imagined this middle path we found." "I never imagined having a son," James said quietly. "No, I can't imagine life without him, or without you in my life, in whatever capacity works for us going forward." Caroline didn't respond verbally, but she moved closer, her shoulder touching his as they stood at the railing. It was a small gesture, but significant, a physical acknowledgement of the connection that had never fully broken, despite years of separation. "My name is Theo Teller, and I want to thank you for joining me on this emotional journey. If you enjoyed this story of second chances and family reconciliation, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Your comments about what touched you in this story are always appreciated, and I'd love to hear your suggestions for future stories. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss another heartfelt tale." As the city lights twinkled below them and the stars shone overhead, James Whitfield reflected on the strange and wonderful path that had led him here. A chance sighting at a baseball game had transformed not just his daily reality, but his fundamental understanding of what constituted a successful life. The empire he had built still stood, still generated wealth beyond most people's comprehension, but it was no longer the center of his universe. That position was now occupied by a bright, curious 10-year-old boy, and perhaps by the remarkable woman who had given him that greatest of gifts, the chance to be a father, to know his son, to discover the kind of man he truly wanted to be. Whatever the future held, whether Oxford led to reconciliation or simply to a better co-parenting arrangement, James knew he would never again lose sight of what truly mattered. Some lessons came at terrible cost, through years of misplaced priorities and missed opportunities. But if those lessons were truly learned, perhaps even the most driven, success-oriented person could find their way back to the deeper joys of human connection. For James Whitfield, billionaire CEO and father, that journey had begun with a startling resemblance on a jumbotron screen and had led, step by careful step, to this rooftop under the stars, to the possibility of a second chance at the life he had once been too blind to value. It was, he reflected, as the night breeze carried the sounds of the city upward, the most valuable acquisition he had ever made.